When you master detachment, people start respecting you. Stoicism for self-discipline. There is a person in your life. Maybe you have met them, maybe you have only sensed them from a distance, who carries themselves differently. They do not chase. They do not beg. They do not shrink when criticized or inflate when praised. When things go wrong around them, they do not collapse. When things go right, they do not perform. They simply move through the world with a kind of quiet gravity that makes other people lean in, pay attention, and, almost without understanding why, deeply respect them. You have wondered what they have that you do not. You have assumed it was confidence, or charisma, or some fortunate combination of genetics and circumstance. But it is none of those things. What they have mastered is detachment. Not coldness, not indifference, not the emotional numbness of someone who has been hurt so many times they stopped feeling. Real detachment, stoic detachment, is something far more powerful and far more rare. It is the ability to engage fully with life while remaining unowned by it. To care deeply without being controlled by caring. To want things without being destroyed by the wanting. To love without making love a prison. The Stoics built entire philosophies around this principle. Marcus Aurelius practiced it while governing an empire. Epictetus taught it from a position of literal slavery. Seneca wrote about it while navigating the treacherous politics of Nero's Rome. These were not men hiding from life. They were men in the absolute center of life, and detachment was what kept them standing. Today we are going to go deep into this. What detachment actually is, why it commands respect, how it builds the kind of self-discipline that changes everything, and how you can begin practicing it, not in theory, but in your actual relationships, your actual work, your actual daily life. If this kind of wisdom is what you come here for, please subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deeper into Stoic philosophy so you can live with more strength, more clarity, and more self-possession. Now let us begin. Before we can understand what Stoic detachment is, we need to destroy what it is not, because the word carries baggage. When most people hear detachment, they picture someone cold, distant, emotionally unavailable, the person who never says I love you first, who walks away without looking back, who wears disconnection like armor because somewhere, sometime, feeling things cost them too much. That is not detachment. That is damage dressed up as strength. The Stoics were not emotionally numb. Marcus Aurelius grieved the deaths of his children. He lost several during his lifetime. Seneca wrote with devastating emotional honesty about friendship, loss, and the passage of time. Epictetus, despite his philosophy of radical acceptance, was not a man without passion. These were deeply feeling human beings who simply refused to be governed by their feelings in ways that destroyed their judgment and their peace. Detachment is also not apathy. The detached person does not stop caring about outcomes. They do not become passive, resigned, or indifferent to the quality of their work, their relationships, or their contribution to the world. In fact, the opposite is often true. When you detach from the desperate need for a specific outcome, you paradoxically perform better. You think more clearly. You act more freely. You bring your full capability to the moment rather than a version of yourself distorted by anxiety and grasping. And detachment is not superiority. It is not looking down on people who are emotionally reactive and congratulating yourself for being above it all. That is arrogance wearing Stoicism's clothing. True detachment is humble. It is self-aware. It knows that the work of non-attachment is never finished. that every day brings new opportunities to be pulled off center, and that every day requires recommitment to the practice. Know what detachment is not, then you can begin to understand what it is. Stoic detachment is the practice of engaging with life fully, loving, working, striving, connecting, while maintaining an inner anchor that does not move regardless of what happens on the outside. It is the difference between being in the storm and being of the storm. You can feel the rain. You can acknowledge the wind. But you are not swept away. Marcus Aurelius described it as the ability to be like a rocky promontory against which the waves constantly break. The waves do not stop. The storm does not pass because you have mastered detachment. The world remains exactly as chaotic, as unpredictable, as gloriously indifferent to your preferences as it has always been. But you, your center, your judgment, your peace, these remain yours. The Stoics called the inner citadel, that fortress inside you that no external event can breach unless you open the gate yourself. Detachment is the practice of keeping that gate closed, not through suppression, not by forcing your feelings underground where they quietly poison everything, but through understanding, through the disciplined recognition that your feelings about events are not the events themselves. That the story you tell about what is happening is not what is happening. Epictetus put it simply: it is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. The job loss is neutral. The rejection is neutral. The criticism is neutral. What gives these things power over you is the meaning you assign them, and meaning is always, ultimately, a choice. This is the foundation of detachment. Not the denial of reality. The refusal to let reality write your story for you. Here is something that took me a long time to understand. Respect is not given to the person who needs it most. It is given to the person who needs it least. Think about the people in your life who command the most genuine respect, not the people who demand it, not the ones who perform their way into admiration, but the ones whose respect feels real, earned, freely given. What do they have in common? Almost universally, they do not seem to need your approval. They are not angling for your validation. They are not adjusting their behavior based on whether you are impressed. They are simply being who they are, doing what they do, and letting that be enough. This quality, this self-containment, is magnetic in a way that desperation never is. And it is entirely a product of detachment. When you are attached to approval, people sense it: the way you change your opinion when challenged, the way you over-explain when criticized, the way you fish for compliments, shrink under dismissal, perform enthusiasm you do not feel because you need the room to like you. These are invisible signals, but people read them instantly, unconsciously, and respond to them by giving you less respect, not more. When you are detached from approval, the opposite happens. You hold your position without aggression. You receive criticism without crumbling. You disagree without needing the other person to agree with your disagreement. You let people be wrong about you. And this absolute absence of approval seeking, is what communicates: I know who I am, I do not need you to confirm it. That is the most commanding message a human being can send, and you send it not with words but with the simple, consistent practice of not needing what everyone around you is desperately seeking. Most conversations about self-discipline focus on willpower, on grinding harder, on motivating yourself more aggressively, on building routines so rigid they leave no room for the weakness of being human. And some of that has value. But it is missing something fundamental. The deepest source of self-discipline is not willpower. It is detachment. Here is why. Every failure of self-discipline, every time you reach for the thing you said you would not reach for, every time you avoid the thing you said you would do, every time you react when you intended to respond, is rooted in attachment. Attachment to comfort, attachment to immediate pleasure, attachment to the feeling of relief that comes from not doing the hard thing, attachment to the approval that comes from saying yes when your soul is saying no. When Epictetus trained his students, he did not tell them to white-knuckle their way through temptation. He told them to change what they valued, to practice wanting different things, to build such a deep attachment to their own integrity and such a complete detachment from external rewards that the temptation lost its power not through resistance but through irrelevance. This is a different kind of self-discipline. Not the discipline of force, but the discipline of philosophy. The discipline of a person who genuinely does not want the thing that used to control them. Not because they are suppressing the want, because they have examined it clearly enough to see that it was never actually serving them. Detachment does not make self-discipline easier through more willpower. It makes it easier by dissolving the attachment that made the temptation compelling in the first place. That is a permanent solution, not a temporary strategy. One of the most visible and immediately powerful expressions of Stoic detachment is the discipline of not reacting. Not suppressing your reaction, but pausing long enough between stimulus and response to choose who you want to be in that moment. Viktor Frankl, writing from inside a Nazi concentration camp, described this as the last human freedom, the ability to choose your response to any given situation. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there is a space. And in that space lies your freedom, your dignity, and your power. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years before Frankl. Marcus Aurelius practiced it in every interaction, training himself to pause before responding to provocation, to ask what virtue required rather than what emotion demanded. Epictetus taught it as the cornerstone of all philosophical practice. You cannot always control what enters your life. You can always control how you meet it. In practice, this looks like this. Someone says something that would normally ignite you. The old version of you fires back immediately, matching their energy, escalating the conflict, saying something designed to wound. The detached version of you breathes, pauses, observes the feeling without being commanded by it and responds, or chooses not to respond at all, from a place of intention rather than reaction. This single practice, this pause, changes relationships, careers, and the entire texture of a life. Because a person who cannot be provoked into losing themselves is a person who is impossible to manipulate. And a person who cannot be manipulated commands a very specific kind of respect. Not the fearful respect given to the powerful, the genuine respect given to the free. Here is the question that always comes up when we talk about Stoic detachment in the context of ambition and achievement. If I detach from outcomes, if I stop caring desperately whether I succeed or fail, will I stop trying? Will I lose my drive? Will detachment make me comfortable with mediocrity? Know and understanding why requires a very specific distinction. Detachment from outcomes does not mean indifference to effort. It means separating the quality of your effort from the certainty of your result. It means doing your absolute best, bringing everything you have to your work, your craft, your goals, and then releasing your grip on what happens next. Not because results do not matter, but because your obsessive attachment to a specific result is often the very thing that prevents you from achieving it. The athlete who is so attached to winning that they cannot perform under pressure is not a better competitor for their attachment. They are a worse one. The entrepreneur who is so terrified of failure that they cannot make bold decisions is not protected by their fear. They are limited by it. The person so desperate to be loved that they chase and grasp and cling is not more likely to be loved. They are less. Detachment from outcomes frees you to compete fully, to create fully, to love fully, because you are no longer spending half your energy managing the anxiety of what happens if you fail. You can give everything to the process, to the doing, the making, the becoming, and trust that whatever comes from that full investment is what was meant to come. The Stoics called this preferred indifference. You prefer to succeed. You work toward success with everything you have. But you do not require it to remain intact as a human being. That is freedom. And from freedom comes the best work. Nothing tests your Stoic detachment more completely than relationships. Because relationships are where attachment lives most naturally, most ferociously, and most destructively. We attach to people's approval, to their presence, to our image of who they are and who we are together. We make other people responsible for our emotional state. And then we wonder why relationships so often become sites of quiet suffering. The Stoics did not say do not love. They said do not make love a cage, for yourself or for the person you love. Real love, the kind that is sustainable, that grows rather than suffocates, requires a degree of detachment. The ability to love someone fully while remaining yourself. To want their happiness without making their happiness the only source of yours. This is the paradox that experience confirms and Stoicism explains. When you stop chasing, people lean in. When you stop needing, you become needed. When you stop performing for approval and simply inhabit yourself with genuine comfort and self-possession, you become deeply, irresistibly attractive to people whose attraction is actually worth having. This is not manipulation. It is not a strategy for playing games. It is the simple, powerful result of becoming a person who is genuinely whole without requiring anyone else to complete them. And that wholeness, that self-sufficient inner life, is one of the most compelling things a human being can embody. Practice loving without losing yourself. Practice caring without controlling. Practice being fully present in your relationships while remaining fully anchored in who you are. This is Stoic love. And it is the only kind that lasts. There is a version of you that everyone around you can feel, even when you say nothing. It is the version of you that is either leaking need or radiating sufficiency. And people respond to that invisible signal far more powerfully than they respond to your words, your appearance, or your achievements. When you need validation, people sense the hunger. They may feed it, may give you the compliment, the reassurance, the approval you are seeking, but they do not respect the needing. Something in them registers the dependency and files it away. You become, subtly and perhaps unfairly, someone who requires management. Someone who needs to be handled carefully because their emotional state is contingent on how others treat them. When you need nothing, when your sense of worth is internally sourced, your peace is self-generated, your confidence does not depend on today's feedback, the signal is completely different. You become someone in whose presence people feel free. Because they do not have to manage you. They do not have to calibrate their honesty to protect your feelings. They do not have to perform enthusiasm they do not feel. They can simply be. which is the greatest gift one person can offer another. And paradoxically, people give more to those who need less. They are more generous with their respect, their honesty, their genuine affection, because they are not giving it out of obligation or anxiety. They are giving it freely, which is the only way it is actually worth receiving. Need nothing from anyone, not because people do not matter, but because when you need nothing, everything they give you is real. Detachment is not a state you arrive at once and then possess forever. It is a daily practice, sometimes an hourly one. It requires the same kind of recommitment that physical fitness requires. You do not go to the gym once and stay strong forever. You do not practice stoic detachment once and remain unshakable forever. The world is endlessly creative in its ability to find new things to attach you to. So, what does the practice look like in actual daily life? Begin in the morning with a simple stoic exercise. Before your day begins, identify the things that are most likely to pull you off center today. The difficult conversation, the uncertain outcome, the person whose opinion you are most tempted to seek. Name them. Then remind yourself, clearly and without drama, I can engage fully with all of this and remain myself. My worth is not determined by how any of this resolves. Throughout the day, practice the pause. Every time you feel the urge to react, to defend, to chase, to explain, to seek reassurance, pause. Breathe. Ask, what would the detached version of me to hear? Not the cold, closed off version. The grounded, self possessed, fully present version. Then do that. In the evening, review. Not with judgment, with curiosity. Where did I lose my center today? What attached me and pulled me from myself? What would I do differently tomorrow? This is not self criticism. This is the honest self assessment of a person who is genuinely committed to growth. Detachment is built one pause at a time, one examined moment at a time, one choice, made slightly better today than it was yesterday, compounded across months and years into something unrecognizable and extraordinary. Here is what no one tells you about mastering stoic detachment. It does not produce dramatic visible results immediately. The person who begins practicing it this week will not suddenly command a room by Friday. The relationship that has been governed by anxious attachment will not transform overnight. The self-discipline that has been powered by willpower and collapsing regularly will not become effortless in a month. Detachment is a long game, and the Stoics were long game thinkers. But what happens over time, over months and years of consistent practice, is something that is genuinely difficult to articulate to someone who has not experienced it. The things that used to devastate you become manageable. The things that used to ignite you become interesting data. The approval you used to crave becomes something you can take or leave without your inner world shifting. The outcomes you used to grip desperately become things you work toward cleanly, without the distortion of panic. And in that space, that growing, accumulating space of inner freedom, something else happens. You begin to discover who you actually are beneath the wanting and the fearing. The self that exists independent of how today went. The self that does not change based on whether you were praised or criticized, successful or unsuccessful, loved or rejected. That self, stable, curious, capable, genuinely at peace, is the foundation of everything. Every relationship, every achievement, every contribution worth making comes from that place. Marcus Aurelius spent decades practicing this. Epictetus spent a lifetime teaching it. Seneca wrote about it until his final days. Not because they had mastered it perfectly, but because they understood that the practice itself, the daily returning to center, the honest recommitment to non-attachment, was the life well lived. It is not a destination. It is the path. When you master detachment, people start respecting you. Not because you have become mysterious. Not because you have learned to play games. Not because withholding yourself is a strategy for making others pursue you. But because a person who is genuinely free, who does not need your validation, cannot be destabilized by your criticism, refuses to chase your approval, is one of the rarest and most compelling human beings you will ever encounter. We are surrounded by people performing strength while privately crumbling, performing confidence while privately seeking reassurance at every turn, performing indifference while privately devastated by every slight. The performance is exhausting for them and, eventually, transparent to everyone else. The Stoic does not perform. They practice. They build, slowly and deliberately, an inner life so solid, so self-sustaining, so genuinely free that the performance becomes unnecessary. What you see is what is there. And what is there is a person who has done the work, the quiet, unglamorous, daily work, of becoming unknown by the world. That is not a small thing. That is perhaps the most significant thing a human being can accomplish. To move through this world, with all its chaos, its unpredictability, its bottomless appetite for your attention and your approval and your anxiety, and remain yourself. Fully yourself. Grounded, clear, free. Marcus Aurelius did it while governing an empire. Epictetus did it in chains. Seneca did it in the corridors of absolute power. They were not superhuman. They were human beings who chose, every single day, to practice something that most people never even attempt. You can make that choice today. Not perfectly, not all at once, but the first step, the awareness that detachment is possible, that it is learnable, that it is the source of the respect and the self-discipline and the inner freedom you have been seeking, that step is available to you right now. Take it, practice it, return to it every time you drift. The drifting is not failure. The returning is the practice. And slowly, beautifully, quietly, powerfully, you will become the person in the room that everyone feels but cannot quite name. The one who does not chase. The one who does not crumble. The one who moves through the world with that unmistakable, unperformable, deeply earned quality that makes people lean in and pay attention. The one who has mastered detachment. That person is not somewhere in your future. They are the version of you that is built, one practice moment at a time, starting now. If today's video gave you something real, something you needed to hear, please subscribe to this channel. Every single week we go deep into Stoic philosophy and the wisdom of history's greatest minds so that you can live with more self-discipline, more inner freedom, and more genuine strength. Hit subscribe. Share this with one person who is ready to stop chasing and start building. Leave a comment below telling me where detachment is hardest for you right now. You showed up for this wisdom today. That matters. Now go practice it. See you next week.